We're also required by state law to have an ELL teacher. That's to teach students whose first language is not English so they can access the curriculum. We were hoping we could potentially contract out some of those services. We haven't been able to find a vendor for that. So we still need to fill that gap for those students who are English language learners, which is an additional cost to the budget that we presented at town meeting last May. The largest area where this again is coming from is the area of special ed. And under state law, we are obligated to provide students with a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. So we try and balance what the students' needs are with the realities of what we can afford to give them so they can make effective progress in the classroom. When we put all these things together, our projected overrun already, again, only in October, I know we're now in November, but I haven't seen updated numbers, puts us about $250,000 behind where we wanted to finish the year. So we have some painful considerations of how we could handle it in-house. One of the things we've already done is we've authorized Principal Benito to put a spending freeze on, and we're anticipating that should be able to save us about $73,000 between now and June. That will definitely have some implications to what we can provide the students of Dennett, but we try to take it from areas that will be least impactful to the classroom and the students. We also have a special ed reserve fund that we established with town meetings several years ago that we've fully funded up until last year. We have just over $50,000 in that account. That is another arrow in the quiver we could use to take care of this budget deficit. That would require a vote of the school committee and also the Board of Selectmen to release those funds because they're municipally held funds. But even with the $50,000 in the special ed reserve fund and the spending freeze, which should save us about $73,000, we are still far from being able to fill this hole. And we were coming here today to have a conversation about what the town might be able to potentially help us with to help mitigate some of the deep cuts, which could get all the way to personnel in our building this current year.
Are you expecting these shortages to continue to grow?
So this is where I will now shift the information over to my administration because they have more up-to-date information.
So if you take a look at the pamphlet I put together, all the board members have a pamphlet. Is there anything there are some pamphlets? There's a written number, so if you want to.
287 versus 215.
Yeah. So if you look at the middle column on the inside, these are the updated budget numbers as of November 12th. So on November 12th, I took all of the year-to-date expenditures. I projected out any obligated costs, including a long-term leave that is going to occur in May. And that is what's included in the numbers in that middle column where it says November 2024. So that number, with the current projected deficit of $162,958.18, that is the current projected deficit. Mind you, that doesn't include $6,000 in special ed transportation. We have a family that's driving their child that could at any moment choose to not drive their child, which would add $6,000 to this. This also doesn't include any unforeseen events that may cause additional costs. Like, for example, there's quite a bit of work being done for the well room. That's not something that could have been predicted. That was something that DEP came in and said, you must do this. So this is where we're at for right now, projected out through June 30th, provided everything goes well.
Discussion? Anybody? Well, we all live within Proposition 2.5, which makes it a little difficult financing things. Why is this not going to continue to grow, since it's grown this much in only a couple of months? Okay.
It very well could. Your budget is so lean, and we are legally obligated to provide students what they need as determined by special education law. The team meets, looks at data to determine the needs of the child. The needs of the children, either here or moving in, can change. And once we know that, it dictates the expenses that may be necessary. If something were to go wrong in the building that's unforeseen, that could again dictate something that we would have to do in order to continue education in the building. So it could continue to grow, and there's no place to pull from.
I'm still unclear. Maybe you can explain it to me. I'm maybe a little thick here. But it's November, we are told now that we have a deficit of this amount now. Why isn't it going to continue?
So I have projected out the expenses. So for example, the tuition for replacement is a known amount.
Okay.
And so I have projected out the known costs through, of course.
Barring unforeseen circumstances?
Utilities
Yeah.
are ballparked. They're a good estimate, but I have projected out the known costs. So as I say, if everything goes well, then this should be where we end up at the end of the year. But for example, we have encumbered funds for the first student transportation buses. We know how much we're going to spend over the course of the year. That money is set aside and it's part of this. Tuitions for out-of-district placements are part of this.
Is this going to require a special town meeting to meet this? Because we obviously don't have enough money in the reserve account to cover a shortage like this.
We would have to deal with it at a special town meeting in May.
Because our reserve fund isn't large enough to cover this. Well, I guess hindsight's wonderful.
Chairman, can I ask, please? So, I notice on the left side of the pamphlet, we talk about areas of budget concern, and it was referenced that the budget was cut very lean. That said, the budget would not have been able to accommodate a placement such as this because we don't have a 5% wiggle room in our budget. That said, we have other things beyond an out-of-district placement. We have additional paraprofessional, we have multiple long-term leaves of absences, and ELL. Are the numbers that we have on the center and left of the, center and right of the pamphlet, are those including any of those potential?
All of those.
Okay, so that would hire
The ELL teacher,
okay,
maintain the current staffing for the one-to-one paraprofessional that was hired. It would pay for the projected leaves that we know about, one that just ended, one that's ending December 2nd, and one in May.
and so just probably because I was a little confused when we were talking about the paraprofessionals before, we were going to have the thought was to have a paraprofessional move to help special ed. Are we not going to have them move and we're hiring a special ed paraprofessional? Is that how we're doing it?
The special ed paraprofessional was hired in August.
Okay.
So the movement, I believe, is part of the reduction. That there was a resignation.
Yeah, and did we cut a paraprofessional out of last year's budget? And if so, are we still down that paraprofessional?
I'm down 1.4 from last year, John.
1.4. So, okay, that's an easy way to ask the question. Takes me 6 times, but we'll get there eventually. So, does this get us back to 1.4, or where does this leave us at 1.4?
Down 1.4.
Even more, if we go with all of the reductions.
Could you speak up a little?
It's 3 additional reductions in paraprofessionals and a custodian, if in fact,
No, I didn't want to talk about what we cut. I'm trying to understand what our deficit is,
Where we are right now.
where we are right now. So if we were to make this whole, we would still be down 1.4 paraprofessionals than where we were a year and a half before.
yes.
There was one added in August. Does that bring you back to .4?
No,
No.
So 2.4 were cut last year?
the one that came along in August was brand new to us
Right,
That's an addition.
as an addition.
So you're down to.
so you're down .4.
No.
It's a
We-
one-on-one.
That's a 1-to-1.
Okay.
That was added August.
I'm sorry,
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
to clarify, there was money allocated for a one-to-one paraprofessional in a paraprofessional line that was not part of the budget. So if there was 1.4 paraprofessionals cut last year and one was added in August, that puts us at .4 financially, regardless of the role of the paraprofessional.
But I want to talk about, I appreciate that, that's great. But we are down 1.4 from the perspective of what's being accomplished in the building.
Correct.
Fair, thank you.
Servicing the students, yeah. All right. Okay, and so we have reductions that we hope to be able to take out of the budget freeze. But we've done a budget freeze now for 3 years, this will be our 3rd year?
This is our second.
Second year. No, we did one the year before.
Right at the end.
Yeah, but okay. So are we confident that this is, like, how far behind are we getting with some of the things that we're freezing the budget on? In other words, how much are we kicking the, it's good to not spend where we don't need to spend, but how much are we kicking the can down the road if we've done this multiple years?
I think having purchased what we purchased in summer would be enough to get us where we don't have to make any major purchases. The thing that concerns me the most, John, is almost every year we've had something happen with the building, as you well know.
Yeah, yeah.
That's my biggest concern. As far as supplies and whatnot, we can get by.
If it makes you feel any better, how it happens with the rest of our buildings too.
I understand.
Yeah, but I asked the administration to do one of the worst things I've ever asked an administration to do, and basically come up with a list of items from least impactful to most impactful to make up the entire budget deficit if the town isn't able to help us with our current situation. The list is far more comprehensive than what's in this pamphlet here. But seeing 3 full-time paraprofessionals on there automatically sends up the red flag to me. Because if we're not giving the kids the support they need within Plympton, we're gonna end up sending those kids out of Plympton. And that's exactly one of the reasons why we keep having deficits, is a lot of out-of-district placements cost now $200,000 to $300,000 per student.
Yeah, I was curious, how much of this, or, just a percentage-wise estimate is for out-of-district placements for this deficit?
52,000.
Excuse me?
You're actually paying $52,000.
For
the
out-of-district?
Placement. The specialized services and equipments
Yeah.
and things like that for students, that cost a lot of money.
But if we
sure.
were happen to run into sending a child out of district,
It's
from this point
It's
on,
100,000,
it's easily 100,000 depending on the center.
yeah, between
Right.
tuition and transportation. That's what I would ballpark.
Which is why seeing paraprofessionals on this list as a potential area to cut is the most concerning to me. Because of the implications of the quality of education in their home school with their friends and family versus us paying $100,000, $200,000 to send them somewhere else because we're not meeting their educational needs in Plympton.
So, so the number here for 215 711 and change. That is the current number that addresses leave of absence, ELL, out-of-district placement, and specialized services.
And the
That we are
additional-
aware of
Yes.
today, absent anything else changing.
Yes.
So I'm just going to do this to play with it. So if we were to, because I am particularly concerned about the paraprofessional situation, because if we have just one, if we have one child that then needs out-of-district placement, it would have been a lot cheaper to do that in a paraprofessional. But if, so if we just played with numbers for a minute, we would be at 1.4 is probably what, 30,000? Roughly, something like that. So you're at 280, you have 162 and change in savings with, from Halifax reimbursement, special ed stabilization, and budget freeze. So that leaves us $120,000 short, I think.
75 and 55.
Could you repeat? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so if
I didn't
we,
follow that.
sure, we have, I'm going to speak in rounders, we have $250,000 that we have determined based on where we are today for those various items, including long-term leave of absence, ELL, and out-of-district placement and specialized services. We're at 250, that's on the center
Yes.
tab there.
And then if you subtract out,
And then if we subtract out 50,000 for stabilization, 38,000 from Halifax reimbursement, and 73,000 from cost savings. That's another, that's 160 that we take out from 280, that leaves us 120. Very rough numbers.
I'm no expert at all in school budgets, but I just want to know, do these figures also include your expected reimbursement for your out-of-district students?
That money has already been allocated through your budget processing from last year, so your 240 grant and your circuit breaker funds have already been allocated to the school budget during the budget process last year. I think there might be $93.
I think what's being asked is that, is there anything that we could expect from
Right.
additional funds this year?
There is potentially an option to approach extraordinary relief, but we would have to hit certain thresholds, and I don't know if we're there.
125% of what we did last year. And don't forget, we moved students from Plympton to Silver Lake based on their grade levels. So I don't think we're going to meet that threshold of over 125%.
We could potentially.
We could,
That's
but
where they started.
So there's a chance, but we wouldn't know that number until May.
March.
March.
March we
apply.
apply, and then May they tell us.
Right.
So because we were required to change how we set the district up in order to technically move the way that the law is in the state, we now get penalized this year because the number doesn't line up, even though it doesn't seem right.
Sure.
Okay. But the following year, if something like that happened, and hopefully it
Then we
doesn't,
should be, yes.
it would be based on this
Yes.
year. But then in the next school year, would we expect some additional funds because we would have, because we're basically doubling our special ed costs in the Plympton school from what was budgeted for this year for what it will actually be.
There may be a way to speak with others to say that we reorganized the district and these were the actual costs from last year for Plympton by grade level. And we should be comparing that to what's in the budget this year. It's a risk. I don't think they're going to go for it, but we could try that, in which case we would be eligible for extraordinary relief.
But at least for next year's budget, our reimbursement comes on the prior year's expense. And so the money that would come back into Plympton
Yep.
next year would be double what we would have expected because we'd be double our, or theoretically. I know
Right.
it's not-
this-
I know it's not
Yeah,
under one.
so the state sets the threshold, right? It's about $58,000 to $60,000. Anything after that, they give you like 75%. So let's say it's a $100,000 student going out of district. Anything, the 52,000 is the first threshold you have to make, and then anything above that, they'll give you anywhere from 68 to 75% of your money back for circuit breaker. So you don't get like 100%, you get a portion of what's left over after you meet the threshold. So it's not a one-to-one, so to speak. But it's income that you can use, it's a revenue that you can use to support out-of-district placements. The 240 grant, is based on the prior year, right? Enrollment of special education. So last year, for Plympton, the special education enrollment looked larger because we still had all those out-of-district students that were attached to us even though they were in grades 7 through 12. This year now, what's going to happen is they're going to base our 240 grant money on just the students that are in K to 6 and not the out-of-district students. So you didn't have that many going from 7 to 12, I think it's 4 or 5 students, but it's 4 students. So it's $67,000, $69,000 for the 240 grant. It's not a lot of money. The problem is that special education is a dynamic process. And the budget process itself tries to make it a very static process, saying this is how much it's going to cost. And it doesn't. A parent can request a certain test, a certain evaluation, a neuropsychological evaluation, and it's $6,000. And that's how much it costs, and we have to deliver that. So it's really difficult to budget special education to the penny and then not expect it to go over.
What's being done on the state level?
They have a lot of unfunded mandates. And they rely on federal government for the IDEA money and the circuit breaker money to say, we're actually helping you. I think we're not the only district that's in this particular situation. Many districts across, as I speak to the special education directors that I know, are in the same boat. We're all struggling, how do you do this? How do you make ends meet? The budget is set, we have the budget, but this is the kids' needs. So it's difficult, it keeps you up at night.
I mean, we've had three years now that we've had to come back and get some additional funds in order to deal with changes in the budget. That said, we had 8 years before that where we had money left over. And part of the challenge here, of course, is that the state did do a good thing in creating that special education stabilization fund, which we took full advantage of. But we were only, was it 2%, Jason?
I mean, 2% of net school spend.
We were limited to 2%. That was $50,000, which, if you blink, that's spent, as we're going to blink and it's going to be gone, and we will be at zero in that. If the system had been better at the time, we had many years where we could have, instead of putting a classroom floor in, we could have put that money towards this, and this would have helped us buffer it if it were 5 or even 10%. And we would have had a savings account for an actual rainy day rather than a piggy bank. Because $50,000 doesn't even pay for an out-of-district placement.
Right.
So, and now we will have none. So, I mean, we did have some good times, and unfortunately now we're in a trouble time. But I think and I do think, I know we have to be very sensitive about how we talk in public about specific, especially for we have a very small school and a very small population of students, but I do think offline we probably should do some modeling of what we think costs will be, what we might expect for just making some assumptions so we can understand the full impact. The other thing is we don't really see the full impact because some of these grants come back to the town, and so they come back and they disappear in the general fund. And it is really there to offset the expenditures that we make at town meeting for the school, but we really don't see some of that going together. But I think where we're at, and we're not going to make any decisions tonight, but I think the notional thing, and I'd ask administration to take some time and go back and think on it if that makes sense. In order for us not to do any reductions, and in order for us to put the school on the footing that we need to hopefully prevent any additional, or help prevent additional out-of-district placements by providing staff in the classrooms, we're short $120,000 for this fiscal year. If we do everything else that we've said, which is better than 250. It's still 120.
So
That-
that does come to a question that I would like your input on as the finance committee for one of the next steps. As I previously mentioned, in order for us to use the special ed reserve fund, it takes a vote of the Board of Selectmen and the Plympton School Committee. Prior to this evening, I didn't know what resources the town had. I didn't know what the plan from the administration was going to be. Would you say that it is in our best interest to fully utilize the $50,000 in that special ed reserve fund as one of our major levers in addressing this budget deficit?
Well, I think we need to discuss that.
Okay.
Yeah, we would need to discuss that.
Okay. Then again, in the subsequent conversation, I guess we would need to find out what potentially the town could do, but also understanding that this would require a vote at a special town meeting.
Right.
So even if the finance committee, town manager, board of selectmen, and the Plympton School Committee came up with an idea of how to solve this, it would really come down to the voters of Plympton of how they'd like to
Proving.
put these resources to work.
Right?
So I know we don't have a special town meeting planned until our annual town meeting. It does make me extremely nervous to have this kind of budget deficit continue on
Yeah, I know.
without us addressing it as the Plympton School Committee for too long. I understand we still need to do some thinking, but I believe that we would probably need to have some answers at the latest at the beginning of the new year, so we can make some difficult choices if we need to. So that's where I feel we are as the school committee at this point.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
I
you.
think that's where we are as the school committee at this
Yeah.
point in thinking of this problem and the solutions and the levers we have to address it.
Right. I am still concerned, I think you probably are as well, that this deficit could grow. That really does, cause me a bit of concern, considering, the restraints that we have on what we can do, but hopefully it won't. Anybody else have anything they would like to say?
If you want.
You can do whatever you'd like.
Stand in front of kids all day. Put my head down.
There better be great for us.
My name is Liz Goodman. I've been teacher at Dennett for 18 years. I've taught many of your children. I'm speaking on behalf of the community of educators of the Dennett. We're deeply concerned with how this budget reduction is going to diminish the learning opportunities for our students and have a negative impact on their overall school experience. As you heard, we already started this year down a full-time math interventionist and a full-time para. So due to those cuts, students weren't receiving any additional math support other than their gen ed teacher. And recently another paraprofessional position was not rehired when she went out. So we're really concerned that part of the cuts would be, as we said, the general ed paraprofessionals, those 3 FTEs that are on there. That would mean that we'd be left with 2 full-time paraprofessionals to service not only the 32 students with IEPs over 7 grades, but the other 217 students who are part of that community. They don't just cover IEP minutes, they run reading and math groups. They are a constant in the kids' lives at recess and at lunch. They greet them every day with dog bones for the dogs.
Thanks for clarifying.
But they are the glue that holds our whole building together. We're deeply concerned about how those cuts will affect not only our students and our staff, but the families of the people who have worked so tirelessly to contribute to Plympton kids. Hearing about the custodial staff, like our custodian spends his day caring for his own children and then comes and cleans our school for all of the other kids, you know, those 249 that aren't his. We urge you to consider the education of the children of Plympton and what they deserve, and place their needs and their futures at the forefront of discussions that you have. Right now, we are at about 38% of our general ed kids are either partially or not meeting expectations based on district-wide assessments. So without any educational safety nets, meeting the needs of those general ed students is going to, not meeting the needs of those general ed students is going to increase the likelihood of them requiring special ed services in the future, which obviously are more costly. As teachers, we are constantly looking out for our students, and we are begging this afternoon. We just want to advocate for them and for our colleagues. If there's anything that can be done, they need that staff.
Yeah, and as the chairman of the school committee, I can't tell you how much it means to me to see so many of the staff members here after hours to advocate for the students and for their colleagues. It really speaks a lot to the community of Dedham.
What are you suggesting? Do you have any suggestions that would be helpful to us?
I have no idea what the finances are of this town. I don't live here, but I don't know. I mean, I truly have no idea. I just know that at the end of the day, these are our kids, and however we got here, there might be problems with how we got here, and I don't know what those are, but at the end of the day, these are our kids, and we need to take care of them, because it's, wherever the problem was, it wasn't with them.
Right.
They didn't do anything.
Lisa?
Can I just ask, did you say 38% of the general education kids aren't meeting standards? That would be like MCAS?
Well, we use Dibble's data, which is
Okay.
what we use for K1 and K-3, and then we overlapped it with MCAS, or STAR data.
So those kids are actually benefiting from a paraprofessional also. They're using a lot of their time going to those kids too. Okay. That's a big number.
It is a large number.
Marilyn,
Yes.
if I may, I'm Mark Russo, one of the Board of Selectmen, and forgive me if this has sort of been answered and/or my naivete, but two questions. One, what does this imply for next year? So we're looking not only at deficits for this year, but what are we thinking about or expecting might come up in additional years? So that's one. And then two, very much forgive my naivete on this, when we talk about a special town meeting in May, what are we looking at? What kind of motion would that be?
I know.
We've done it unfortunately before, twice.
Yeah.
It would just be, it would end up being a motion on special town meeting in order to transfer
From
the sum of
everybody.
money, what we're notionally talking about, 120,000, if that's what was decided, into the school budget line.
So in essence, to say, we're going to pay for it, there are no more cuts that can be made, and this is the way we're going to have to deal with it.
Like you'd satisfy any other deficit in the departmental budget for the current fiscal year. So you could transfer from, if you thought that there were going to be excess funds in other budget lines, you could transfer from free cash potentially, bearing in mind that a free cash transfer would affect what's available for the fiscal '26 budget. But that would be the same mechanism.
So that's helpful, and then back to the question of what the implications
That's what we
are.
didn't want to talk about?
The implications for FY '26 scare me as well, Mark.
And I think that's the, kind of the point. One thing to
Yeah.
make up the deficit
It's-
this year, but are we looking at the same thing next year, and it becomes
Well,
almost an immovable object?
I think part of what this tells us, and we didn't really have a choice when we approached the budget this last time around, but we had to cut a little too deep. It's obviously easier to not fill a position because it's vacated, but when the position's still really kind of needed, it doesn't help this building one. That said, it's hard to say right at the moment how everything is going to flow out, and that's not really a cop-out. It's that this is our first year adjusting from all the changes that we made, and we can't look just at the Dennett budget, we have to look at total cost of education. And, one thing that we do know is that our assessment does drop a little bit because of the demographic changes we set everything October 1st. So maybe there will be some help with that from the Silver Lake side, but we don't know what the Silver Lake budget's gonna be. So we have to kind of look at all the different pieces. We have to probably look at, our line items as well. I mean, if we've been able to successfully run the school with trimmer lines somewhere in the budget, maybe those just need to be trimmer. Maybe they can't be. Maybe we've trimmed them for a while and now we're gonna have to pay for that. So I think that the concern is, of course, to be able to deal with this year, but it's very much a concern of how we deal with it the next year and the year after. One of the items that, you could look at as a benefit of the reorganization is that any special ed outside of K to 6 is now regional. And that means it's put into the bigger pool. And depending on how that shapes up and how the students fall, we may pay a little bit more in that pool, or we may pay less. But what you won't have is you won't have the same level of shock to the system that you do from one placement walking in. Like, for instance, in grade 7, it would be a different impact to Plympton than it would be in grade 5 or grade 1, right? Because that's just here, it's just our budget, it's not spread out.
Lisa?
Are there any, I'm Lisa Hott, by the way, I'm a town accountant. Are there any students going into the middle school next year? Any age-wise? Or are they all still be with us next year?
I think that's some of what we need to look at in kind of looking at our overall, but that's probably something that's better for us to do
Okay. So you
more
don't know.
with a smaller group, that we can do it without causing any issues, and then can come back with sort of broad numbers that tell the financial picture without talking about individuals.
So if we use a 3% threshold for the budget increase, like that's the norm?
Yeah.
That means according to my math, and I could be wrong, and if I am, it's only $119,250. When you think of the contractual obligations for our staff with their raises and steps, I don't even know if that's going to be enough to cover that. Maybe it will be, but it's certainly not going to be enough to cover the deficit that
Right.
will still be here next year. So in answer to your question, sir, yes, we're still facing the same.
And also, if I may,
Yes, please.
just for the benefit for people in the audience who may not realize, the reason why special education 7 through 12 went to Silver Lake was because it should have always been done that way, per the Department of Education and the attorney for the Department of Education and state regulations. So we took 2 years to explore that and to figure out what that was going to mean and how that was going to impact us. Disentangling that was a big process, and it led to some realizations of the savings that were being realized by pretending to be fully regionalized. And we can't do that. We've been told not to do that. It may have been beneficial at one point, but you can't have it both ways according to the state.
So what are we left with right now, this year?
What are we left with is options.
Mhm.
And you and your committee have an opportunity to examine it, letting me know if you guys think we should utilize the full stabilization fund would be one of the first steps.
And how much would that help?
That would be $50,000.
I know it's $50,000, but what would that be interpreted to allow?
That would bring the deficit down to about $75,000.
I understand the numbers, but what about the services?
That would still require the possible reductions of our 3 paraprofessionals.
The 3
in that fiscal year.
paraprofessionals.
And would leave us no wiggle room for other unanticipated financial encumbrances during the school year, whether the physical plant or another student requiring services.
Do you have anything to say, Selectman?
No, not until we see more numbers. It's very hard to know where we are overall in the town.
Right, right.
But certainly we hear the problem and sympathize.
Again, a macabre piece of math is if we do end up laying someone off and we do it with half a year to go, that's less of a savings to the budget than if we can do it sooner.
Right.
And we also have to then incur the unemployment
Right. Yeah.
aspect of it as well.
Can I ask one more?
Yeah.
Sorry. Is the school committee considering looking for an override from the town? Has that been discussed at all? Not yet.
We just, at this point,
Mhm.
are probably 3 weeks into understanding the current budget deficit we have.
Okay.
At a very high level, the administrative team has started putting together the outlines of next year's budget, but we don't exactly understand the full implications yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that would
And-
happen sooner rather than later if a decision was
Well,
made
we
about it.
couldn't make that decision until we have seen what next year's budget's looking like, because we wouldn't have a number to even base that on. You know, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts in it, and we also need to see and understand what Silver Lake's budget's going to look like. No longer are these separate, this is all together now, and we have to look at the total thing. So, you know, my guess is by the end of January, early February, you're gonna have a good idea of, you know, bad, horrible, okay, right? I mean, but you still, I mean, remember, as you know, you did this many years, Lisa.
Mhm.
It's, you know, you're really, till beginning of March, mid-March, you're not really grounded as to where the budget is. So I think we need, you know, to be able to look at this, to be able to say with confidence where we're going, I don't think until we do the initial cut of the budget, we can have an idea.
Just sort of a general question. As far as the special ed stabilization is concerned, how long would it take to replenish something like that? Like, what would the mechanism be? I'm not all that familiar with the different
So-
criteria for that funding source.
Well, I think we'll have to talk about what a mechanism will be, because the mechanism we used before doesn't exist anymore.
Okay,
And what-
so that
what I
was
mean-
part of that transition.
What I mean
when
by
we
that is that
changed.
we had the overall special ed budget for all Plympton students,
Right.
pre-K to 22.
Mhm.
And in a good year, there was extra money left in the
Right.
budget. And as a result, we used it for floors, we used it for all sorts of capital improvements at the Dennett, and we used it for this. We fully
Right.
funded this, and then we said, okay, there's still money left. That pool is significantly reduced now, because
Okay.
we're just K to 6. And as a result, the chances, you know, clearly this year, there won't be anything left in the budget, but the chances of there being something left in the budget as we're walking into town meeting are very slim,
Right.
even in a good year.
Yeah, in the other area where we used to sometimes realize a boon at the end of the year
Yeah.
was with our vocational line of our budget.
Right.
We, by law, have to allow students who apply to vocational technical education access to those schools. And in the wisdom of the finance committee for many years, we held an extra place just in case a move-in happened or a kid decided and we didn't anticipate it in the budget. To make this year's budget work, we budgeted exactly the kid who wanted to go to that school. So there's gonna be no realized savings at the end of the year for the kid who didn't go.
Right. Understood.
And to that point, if 2 students want to go
It's gonna
next
jump.
year.
It's gonna double.
Now, we don't have that in the budget, we will have to add it through town meeting before we get to the floor, and that would be another
About
10%.
10% of our budget.
No, it's 40 grand, isn't it 40? Yes, isn't that 1%?
Excuse me,
Yeah,
sorry.
but that's a 1%, right? If we're trying to keep a 3 to 3.5% budget, 1% comes very quickly in lots of places.
Right.
It's 1% here, 1% there, and all of a sudden you're in, that's a big number. So, but so we've, lean budgets we have to do when we're trying to get to expenses and keep it in mind, but it also means that we don't have much flexibility. So I think when we get through this, Liz, I do think we probably want to, after we get through this year, figure out whether that's one of those other things that we want to, put $5,000 a year into just as part of the regular order of things. And hopefully, at some point, the state will up that amount, so you can put a
Right.
reasonable amount in there, and probably $5,000 isn't enough, but I'm just throwing a number, so that you can have an actual rainy day fund, because this just wipes it out.
So I did file legislation for that.
Oh,
And it
great,
made it to a
okay.
third reading. But I don't think it made it into the final economic development bill that was just passed.
Okay,
So I'm gonna have to refile in January.
all right. So if your team knows the decision or recommendation of the finance committee, and those of us at the town level in terms of financial team and everything, with their intentions and recommendation regarding that special ed and the 50,000, if we do that by I don't know, in the next couple weeks, is that suitable time frame as far as planning purposes?
It would be hugely beneficial to us. I think it would allay a lot of the concerns of the staff and the parents who are starting to catch wind of the situation at the Dennett, who I've been approached at every time I go out in public in the past week. The sooner, the better. That would be greatly appreciated.
Okay.
Okay.
And I think the harder part is that we need to understand sort of directionally where we want to go with the balance. Because the 50 doesn't solve the balance. And that's probably the bigger piece.
Okay. Yes?
My name is Jenny Frostrom. I'm a parent in town of a fifth grader and second grader, but I'm also a teacher in a neighboring town. I realize we're in a very sticky situation here, but it's after working with paraprofessionals for the last 20 years and how important they are to the success of our students, not just the special education students, but every single student in the building. I really, really would love to see every possible option looked at, every rock turned over, just to see. They're so important, and they're just, losing one is a huge deal, never mind potentially 3. So looking at this myself, and I know my fellow parents here, it's scary to have our kids in this position for the next few years. So again, if you haven't been in a classroom, you may not realize how much they do. They are so important. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear to people that maybe didn't know that. So.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you. We'll all consider the request.
Well, thank you for getting this meeting together at an early time and such a quick date after my first reaching out. Really appreciate how seriously you took it and giving us this time and opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, do we have anything else on our agenda?
Nate sent the minutes over.
I didn't bring them with me. Did you bring them?
I have them on my phone.
Okay, has Drew all had a chance to review the minutes of the last meeting?
Didn't see him
Nate sent them out.
today.
No, he sent them out a couple of days ago. Yeah, a couple of days ago.
He must have missed me. I'm not,
Really?
no.
He said, he would.
Sent it on November 12th.
I would have it as
Oh, wait
well.
a second, if it did come in,
Did you get a chance to read those?
if it did come into my email,
Recording myself, so.
I would put them in a subgroup that I can't access from here, so it doesn't make any difference.
Okay, yeah.
I have them here if anybody wants to see them.
Have it as well. You want to take a look?
Quick look?
Do you want to look or?
Yeah, just trying to make sure.
There you go.
You can do that first, you don't have to do it right away.
Read them all again myself.
Thank you, Marilyn. Everyone would. Meeting from
I'd like to see you. I really love your dress. I'm looking at it.
I read it the other day.
Well, thank you. I like
I don't know, I wish, we were just going through it. It's the last meeting. Let's go to staff first for now. There's nothing we can do right now. It's going to stop.
We're not going to have much Oh, the rest. I feel
It's fresh by me.
Is it all right? All right. Has everybody reviewed the minutes of October the 7th, 2024?
Yes. I'll make a
Is there a
motion to
motion?
approve the minutes
As written?
as written.
I will second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Is there any other information, anything else for discussion tonight?
Do we have our next meeting?
I don't have the list with me.
December 2nd.
December 2nd, yeah.
All right. well,
Which if you look at the end of Nate's.
Is that too big of a gap for us to?
Yeah, do we need?
Really good.
It's good?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Okay, at 5:30. All right. So is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, John.